Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the December the 1st edition of the COVID update. It's also the Hanukkah edition. So I'm going to go straight into sharing my screen. I think there really are two hot topics. The new variant, which I think is on everybody's mind. Oh my goodness. Let me go back. Be with you in a second. Yeah, I want to deal today with the issues around the Omicron variant. Omicron, by the way, is the 15th letter of the Greek alphabet. So we've got 9 letters still to go. So that's where you are with the Omicron variant in terms of its nomenclature. And that's how it's pronounced, by the Omicron. And the second issue I'd like to deal with, also a hot topic, is are we in the fourth wave? Are we getting into the fourth wave? Where are we in the fourth wave? So let me start as a background. Let's look at it globally. If you look at the extent of the COVID epidemic, COVID pandemic, I should say, globally, at the moment, the major activity of COVID is really in the Northern Hemisphere, and particularly in European countries over here. Let me get my pointer up. Yeah, particularly in these Northern European countries. And they are really categorized with a couple of properties. First of all, these countries have a high vaccine coverage, 70%, 80%, even 90% coverage in many of these countries. And at the same time, they are having minimal restrictions. They've lifted the restrictions. People don't wear masks when they go out. They don't wear masks anywhere, just about. There are sporting activities, there are cultural activities, there's a lot of crowding and so on. And in many of these countries, despite the high infection rates, there are still minimal restrictions relying on high vaccine coverage. And in fact, there is quite a high level of hospital admission and severe disease, but the great majority of severe disease is in the unvaccinated. So these are the kind of 4 properties: high vaccine coverage, and together with high vaccine coverage, lifting most of the restrictions, very few restrictions remain, very high infection rates, and the severe disease mainly limited to the unvaccinated. So let's contrast that with where we are in South Africa. Of course, we still do have restrictions, a lot more so than in those European countries. We are level 1, adjusted level 1, so there still are certainly mask mandates outside in a public space, levels of crowding, and so on. I won't go through them, I'm sure you know. So there are some residual restrictions which are still present and published in the Government Gazette. And also when we come to vaccination, our vaccination coverage nothing like many of those European countries, and in fact falling and really disappointing, as I've mentioned in a number of these previous podcasts, previous episodes. So where are we with the vaccination status? 25.6 million doses have been administered. The total number of individuals who've been vaccinated, 42%. So we still have a 58% gap of adults that have not been vaccinated at all. Fully vaccinated, only 36.4% of the adult population. The total population, only a quarter of the whole population has been fully vaccinated, and 28.5% of individuals have had some vaccination. So there still is a wide gap in our population of unvaccinated individuals. However, that does appear to be quite extensive, and probably maybe more extensive than in those European countries, a degree of natural immunity. In other words, people that have been infected who have developed immunity as a result of infection. So if we add up the vaccine-induced immunity and the natural immunity, there may well be a higher degree of protection than what is reflected in these vaccination figures. But nevertheless, I think the vaccination coverage, I just wanted to mention that out of completeness sake, but nevertheless, there still is concern about the degree of non-vaccine individuals in the country, non-vaccinated individuals. And then also, if we come to the high-risk individuals, or older individuals in the population, those who've been vaccinated, 64.36% coverage in the 60-plus age group, quite a bit less, 57.22% of those who have been fully vaccinated in the 60-plus year age group. So again, still in the high risk group, the individuals who are more likely to be hospitalized, big gaps still remaining in vaccination. Now let's look at the epidemic itself. The first, second, and third waves, so there's a different format of a graph which I'll present as compared to what I presented previously, but we can see there's now starting to be an increase in cases, quite a significant, quite a sharp increase in cases. So let's look at the figures. Let me take you back to the beginning of last month, 3rd of November. In that COVID update, I gave the figure of 169 daily cases. 17th of November, with 2 weeks ago, we had 273 new cases. Last week, or where we're up to now, the last 24 hours, 4,373 new cases over the last 24 hours. So you can see a steep increase of the number of cases, of daily cases. Let's look at other parameters. I think you're quite familiar with this now. This is the test positivity, the first wave, second wave, and third wave. And at this stage, we were up to basically about 2 or 3 weeks ago, we're at 1% of tests submitted to the laboratories were positive. This is now increased to 20%. An average of 20% of tests submitted to laboratories now come back positive. So again, this parameter has quite significantly increased. And also, I think I also mentioned previously, one of the other parameters we use to measure the level of the epidemic is in wastewater surveillance, looking at sewage water and other wastewater and isolating the virus. And we see there's quite a significant increase, both in the Pretoria depots and also in the Johannesburg wastewater depot, increase quite significantly. So all these parameters, we are looking at quite a steep, rapidly multiplying epidemic. Really telling in the Jewish community are the Hatzola data. You can see the 29th of October, there were no new cases. And then last month, early last month, 2 new cases, 10, 38. The last week, closing of the last week, up to 128 new cases, 145 active cases on the Hatzola home monitoring program. And then up to date, in fact, really half a week, up to now, 256 new cases in half a week and 371. So you can see in the Jewish community particularly, we really, again, as usual, in the vanguard of the expanding epidemic with many new cases. Fortunately, the majority of them mild. And I'll come to that just now. So how and where did this all start? Well, this appears to have started, and I'm saying appears, there's no real hard evidence for it, but it appears to have started with a main super spreading event in the Tshwane University of Technology. That seemed to be the kind of forerunner of the present outbreak. It's not to say it started, I must emphasize, because there were certainly many other events or functions which also could have contributed to this expansion. So this comes from this News 24 item over here. And the reporter then asks, is this a cluster outbreak? Well, clearly not. We've gone well beyond this. This is a real resurgent, what we're experiencing now. In other words, a maintained increase, or have we officially started in the 4th wave? And this is really what I want to deal with, as well as looking at the variant itself. So let's come to the variant and a few words about it. I'm sorry, I've got only technical slides. I haven't made a non-technical slide. But there was, I think it's really started about 3 weeks ago, in one of the private laboratories in Pretoria, one of the technologists started picking up in their routine PCR test. This is one of the PCR tests that they use, the Thermo Fisher Taqman assay. It's one of the PCR tests. And they noticed that there was something abnormal, something aberrant in the test. It's called an S gene target failure. It's a technical. In other words, one of the parameters was not coming up positive, although obviously it was PCR positive. So there was some signal that there was a mutation, or there was a change, I should say. There was a change due to mutations in viruses which are occurring in the Gauteng area, well, first of all in Pretoria, and then the rest of Gauteng as well. So that was the first inkling about 3 weeks ago. And actually more, about 4 weeks ago, 3 to 4 weeks ago. Now, I think I've mentioned before that there is a network of genomic surveillance of 7 virology laboratories throughout the country, which are continually sequencing. In other words, they look at the sequence of the genome, the genetic structure of the virus, to look for mutations, which then become variants. And specimens are sent from throughout the country, a sample, obviously not all specimens, a sample of specimens for this genomic surveillance. And that's part of an international consortium of genomic surveillance laboratories. And this is how they then characterize the various variants, the alpha, the beta, the gamma, the delta. These little dots represent the various lineages. In other words, as the virus mutates, it's established a lineage. When you get a conglomeration of these lineages, then it becomes a variant. There's a C12. It was a variant, clearly a variant, clearly a lineage. It hadn't really matured. We were worried about it at one stage, just because it seemed to be quite different to these other. You can see it's mutated quite out. It's evolved quite beyond these other variants. Again, I apologize for the technical slides, but just to illustrate the point that on the actual genome of the 529, which is Omicron, 529 is B11529 is the technical name. Omicron now has become the WHO designated name for this new variant. And what is really surprised, and what is let me take it a bit more, it astounded virologists, in fact, worldwide, is the characteristics of Omicron, of this new mutation, a new variant, I should say. When you look at the mutation profile, first of all, there are many, many more mutations than and remember, a mutation is a change in the genetic structure, which translates to a change in the building blocks of the virus, and it imposes then different characteristics or different personality of the virus. Now, this Omicron has had more than 50, going now about 55 mutations in the entire genome. But what's more worrying is that there are more than 30 mutations in the spike protein. Remember, the spike protein is the outermost part of the virus that the virus uses to attach to the cells to establish an infection. And there are more than 30 mutations. Some of them have never been seen before, completely new mutations. Other mutations, we know from other variants, from previous variants, are associated with contagiousness or transmissibility and immune evasion. In other words, the ability of the virus to escape from the immunity induced by the vaccine. So these are, of course, two worrying mutations. And then what's also worrying is having these new mutations, having so many mutations, and having this unique constellation of mutations. Again, apologies for the technicalities. Also, what was very characteristic of 11529 or Omicron is it seems to be completely independent. It's not on the same evolutionary branch as the alphas, the gammas, the thetas, the deltas, and all the others. This is a brand new variant, unrelated. So this has raised a lot of question marks. What does this then translate to? Are we going to have a more transmissible variant? Are we going to have one that's not going to be affected by the vaccine? And are we going to have one which is going to cause more severe disease? So if we look at these variants up to now in South Africa, our second wave was governed by the beta variant. Remember the beta variant, which we were a little bit worried about because also it wasn't so sensitive to the vaccine. That was then replaced by the Delta variant, which caused the third wave. And now we're having this Omicron variant, this blue over here, which seemed to be now displacing the Delta and becoming the driver of the fourth wave. So what are the characteristics? First of all, let's look at the transmission. Is it more contagious? Is it more transmissible? I think I mentioned before, we talked about this R value. The R is it's called the reproductive number of the virus, and it governs how contagious, how infectious it is. So normally it kind of skirts around the 1 mark. What we mean by the reproductive number is that it's the number of individuals who are infected from an infectious person. So in other words, if you have an R value of 2, it means that one infectious person will infect 2 susceptible individuals. Now, normally it doesn't get to 2. Normally it hovers around this 1 mark. If it's above 1, then the epidemic will expand because more susceptible people get infected. If it drops below 1, then the epidemic comes down. Now, what we found with, just ignore this figure over here, what we found with the Omicron is, in fact, the R value has gone to 2.3, which is really at the peak of the previous waves. So we are now at the highest level of of contagiousness of the R number as we were at the peaks of the second and the third wave. So certainly it looks like a highly transmissible virus at the moment. And I'm going to stress from now on, I'm saying this is early days, we are learning, but so far it seems to be a highly transmissible virus, equal in transmissibility to where we were at the peak. So it may well be more transmissible than the Delta. Now you may see in the media, some people are saying 50% more transmissible and 75%. That's really the media. There hasn't really been a definitive calculation. It's too early now. But what has been calculated is where it's resting at the moment is 2.3. It's just high, very high. Is it causing more severe disease? Well, if you look at the hospital data, this is the national hospital data. You can see that week 47 is 2 weeks ago. We're now week 48. Week 46 is 3 weeks ago. You can see there's been an uptick from 3 weeks to 2 weeks ago nationally from 586 cases. This is both in the public and private sector, up to 977. So we are now seeing an uptick in cases nationally. This is a hospital surveillance program which is run by the NICD. I just want to reassure those who are watching from the Western Cape. So far, certainly not seen in the Western Cape. That still seems to be low. Similarly, in KZN, still seems to be low. The Eastern Cape, I know we've got some viewers in the Eastern Cape, also low. I won't go through each of them, but also all the other provinces, Mpumalanga and Limpopo, Northwest and so on, also relatively low. So that national uptick is really from Gauteng. And we can see from 2 weeks ago to last week, we've gone from 279 up to, this is 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, from 279 to 267. This is last week's figure. And that is still, there's always a lag in the surveillance. So ignore that, it's come down to 201. This will probably go quite a lot higher now. So certainly what we're seeing in the hospital surveillance is we're starting now to see an increase of cases being admitted and some cases then going into the ICU. The majority still unvaccinated individuals, but there have been quite a number of breakthrough infections. In other words, individuals who are immunized who are getting infected. And it seems to be that there is some degree of immune evasion. In other words, that this particular Omicron variant seems to have the property that it may well be relatively not so well protected by the vaccine. Now, let me qualify that before I go any further. The vaccine is extremely effective, even with Omicron, in protecting against severe disease. And this is all borne out by statistics, even at this preliminary stage. I must emphasize that. The vaccine is very effective in preventing severe disease. In preventing infection, preventing mild infection, seems to be a little bit lower. We don't have really a figure. We kind of guess it's about at the 60% level, maybe somewhat less so than against Delta. But again, I stress this is early days. I'm just giving you very preliminary thoughts at this early stage. So let's come back to these questions and the issue about, are we in the start of a fourth wave? Clearly, we're well beyond the cluster outbreak. That's completely out. The real resurgence, it looks as if we kind of graduated beyond that stage, and it looks as if we're now on the cusp of a fourth wave. I say not the cusp, the entrance of a fourth wave. I'm not going to go into the actual technicalities, but what I really want to emphasize, how do we know we're in a fourth wave? It's not that some person somewhere wakes up and says, guys, I think we're in the fourth wave. There are a lot of criteria which are used. There are molecular criteria, there are testing criteria, there are also modeling criteria. I won't go through all of this, the various kind of parameters and the models that they use. And they've put all of this information together, molecular, modeling, testing criteria, diagnostic criteria, hospital admission criteria, to then make the kind of technical decision of a fourth wave. And what we've seen in previous waves is that we've always had this period of sustained increase, what we've got here in yellow, before the wave itself, before the actual wave, second wave and third wave. We are now in the fourth wave over here in the sustained increase and about to enter into the fourth wave. And I think that's probably going to come very, very soon when we'll be able to technically say we are now in the fourth wave. So I'm going to stop there now. And I think I've been inundated with questions. I hope I've answered most of the questions which came in with regard to the Omicron variant and with regard to the fourth wave. I've also had a few questions because people are wanting to travel. I think it's now a moot point because, of course, we're now on the red list in many countries, in Israel and the United Kingdom and countries throughout the world, in fact. But let me answer with regard to the booster vaccination. I spoke at length in the last COVID update about boosters. We're still awaiting the Department of Health to allow boosters for individuals over the age of 50. It should come very, very soon. We have been immunized more than 6 months previously. As soon as I get word of it, I will certainly put it in the update. But I think it's about to come. I think it's very, very soon. So I think I'll end there and wish you all a good week and stay well, stay safe, and goodbye.